This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight a commanding legal figure from New York City, Judge Tom Engel. Welcome, Tom. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back here in the Mercer studio with you again, Dr. Robinson, and I'm pleased to be able to be here.
Well, great. We're just welcome, and we're delighted to have you in our fair city here. Now, Judge, I know you're an observer of many issues in the political scene, and the Mueller report has appeared. Could you opine on that a bit as to is it a good report? Was it fairly done? What does it mean in regards to that whole set of circumstances that gave birth to this?
Well, I take it that the main purpose of the Mueller report was to investigate allegations of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And on that score, the report, it seems to me, and I confess not to have read it, but they went through witness after witness. I don't know how many, but it was a lot of witnesses and thousands and tens of thousands of pages of grand jury testimony and hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, and they came up with a clean, crisp conclusion that there was no collusion. I think even the big Trump haters have not been able to really move that conclusion off of ground zero. I mean, that conclusion is there like a big rock.
Well, firstly, collusion is such a broad term. Don't politicians traditionally collude with all sorts of people? And if there had been collusion, would it have been a crime?
Well, the crime is called conspiracy, and there are two kinds of conspiracies. There's under the federal statute, under Title 18 of the United States Code, there's a conspiracy to defraud the United States, but the more common conspiracy is a conspiracy to commit a criminal act. So you can conspire, for example, under federal law to distribute narcotics or to rob a bank. And in that case, they have to prove an agreement between two or more people, and they have to prove the occurrence of what's called an overt act, something that furthers the conspiracy. And if you have that, whether or not you have robbed the bank or sold narcotics, you have been properly charged with a crime under the code. And the word collusion has no legal significance one way or the other at all.
So really, was the investigation about a criminal conspiracy?
I think the sensitivity, of course, was enormous because we're talking about a foreign power.
Yes.
And so if the foreign power were said to have tried to influence the election, and there was abundant proof that was adduced by the Mueller report that Russia tried to do that, and in many different ways, mostly with sort of cyber attacks and things like that, and very subtle campaigns through the internet. But That sort of thing, I take it, has been going on since time began. That countries have tried to influence other countries' elections. So I don't think there's anything particularly surprising about that.
Well, just to probe that a little bit. So I think people naively believe, or at least under the impression, that other countries don't have an interest in the outcome of our elections. They certainly do. They also have thousands of their citizens here that presumably are going to, they're dual citizens that can play a role in any kind of electoral outcome here. And so all kinds of events are taking place. Isn't that right? Over 10% of the, is my understanding, over 10% of the U.S. population was born outside the country. Many of them routinely have dual citizenship, and they would like their mother country to be whatever, well dealt with by the U.S. So it would appear to me it's a really common event, and I would not be surprised if ambassadors are at least trying to understand what's going on to benefit their country, if no other way, with tariffs or defense arrangements, or let's say Central America. A lot of money, U.S. money, is going there. There's a lot of Central American people here. It would be reasonable that that at least the government would want that to keep going, and in some ways would try and influence the election. And then also, don't we do the same thing? I mean, it's famous in Italy, I believe, that right after World War II, at least many of my Italian friends tell me the story, that the Communist Party was really doing very well there, and the CIA, along with the Catholic Church, basically, a lot of American money came in to determine what happens. So it would be routine for the American intelligence agencies to watch elections and try and have some kind of influence on them. Maybe even some dirty tricks about what's going on. Isn't that just the normal deal?
Sure. That I think countries have been trying to do that since, as I said, since time began. A very well-known instance of that was in 1916 when, during the First World War, when America was still neutral, the Germans and the Brits tried to influence the election, and Wilson campaigned on the idea that he kept us out of war, but at the same time he was, once he was reelected, it didn't take him much time at all to come in on the side of the Allies against Germany. But both sides were digging in hard there, and propaganda was rife, and Wilson was able to beat Charles Evans Hughes, and shortly thereafter took us into war.
Well, the story continues to be lurid in regards to that, and there's a Zimmerman telegram. So the British were deciphered this telegram, which it's a complicated story about trying to entice Mexico into a war and then give them Texas and
give them back Texas, right?
Well, don't mess with Texas, Tom. Don't mess with that. Was a good message for anyone. But they played that game, and also I think in World War II it was a very substantial amount of let's see, was it the secret agent Stevenson, I think, was Canadian, and he was located in New York City, and the British were doing everything possible to help Roosevelt win the 1940 election. And contrary-wise, the Germans at least were interested in otherwise some other result. There were Nazi League there in New York, Yorkville, whatever.
The Deutsche Amerikanische Bund.
Yeah,
the
right.
Bund,
That's right.
B-U-N-D.
Okay, yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, there are allegations that Churchill, for example, knew that the Lusitania was going to be sunk by the German submarines, and indeed the Lusitania carried munitions for Great Britain, and so when it was hit, the munitions themselves, of course, exploded, and the ship went down, and that was, along with the Zimmerman telegram, probably the most shocking thing to the American public, and they went, and that was enough to drag us into that war. But anyway, that we're getting a little bit far away from collusion. I think of course, one of the things that fueled that was that the surprise in the polls was that Trump won in the first place, and the Democrats and the liberal side had a very hard time explaining that to themselves and to the American people, since it was assumed that Senator Clinton would win, so they were invested very heavily in the fact that the campaign itself of Trump worked closely with the Russians. Not just that the Russians were trying to subvert by covert means various parts of the American public, but anyway, the collusion conclusion stands, and I think there's no real issue from anyone really that's anything but sound. I mean, they spent 2 years doing it. They spent all this money, $40 million. Mueller has a reputation of being a thorough and competent and fair lawyer, and a long history of being a prosecutor as well as being head of the FBI. So you couldn't have picked a more sort of iconic figure to run that thing, and he ran it apparently through most of the 2 years with, I think, admirable discipline and poise and fairness. Where he fell down was at the end, when the report was finally made public, and those, he made at least 3 mistakes. First, he did not give the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein a report that indicated where the grand jury secret material was. Under federal law, material that comes from the grand jury, whether it's documents that the grand jury subpoenas or testimony of people in the grand jury, that has to be protected. It's secret and it's confidential. And Attorney General Barr and Rosenstein both asked Mueller to highlight those portions of his report, because those portions would have to be excised if the report were going to be published. And for reasons that no one can fathom, really, certainly as a former prosecutor, I can't fathom them, Mueller didn't do that. And so that meant that the Attorney General and his staff and so forth had to ferret that out, and that took a lot of time. It's a 440-page report. The second mistake was that he wrote this letter shortly after the Attorney General had released the report, and he claimed that the Attorney General had not produced his conclusions did not produce the full and fair substance of the report, and that was as much caused by Mueller's refusal to indicate where the grand jury material is anything else, and it also sort of set up the Attorney General, who has been a friend of Mueller's for decades.
Yes.
And one wonders if Mueller had some complaint about the way in which the report was published, that he should call his old friend. I mean, their wives go to church meetings together.
Yes,
they've been
right.
friends forever. or gone to the Office of Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice and said, you know, why is it being treated in this fashion? So it looked both unfair to the Attorney General, who incidentally is a very, very, very good lawyer, and unfair to the President, because it looked like that his Attorney General was hiding something, which is just not true. The last thing, and probably the most important thing, was that he did not reach a conclusion as to the obstruction of justice when such a conclusion was really rather easily reached, it seemed to me. And Barr and Rosenstein reached that conclusion in publishing their initial report about the report. And that was that there was no obstruction of justice. And there are several reasons for that. The first is that nothing was done. The investigation went on. There was no justice that was obstructed. The President may have made intemperate remarks to his own counsel and otherwise to McGahn that he should shut it down, but McGahn never did it. No justice was ever obstructed. And so the crime didn't exist. Not only that, the crime that was supposed to have been committed was found in the first part of the report not to have been committed, i.e. there was no conspiracy with Russia. So there was no crime that could have been obstructed. The third reason is that the President is the President. He is the embodiment of the executive branch and of Article II powers under the Constitution. And Mueller works for him. And if he wanted to fire Mueller, it was well within his power to do so. As there was no crime in any event, and no suggestion that he was covering up anything, because there was nothing to cover up, and he'd produced all these documents and all these witnesses and hadn't claimed executive privilege and so forth, the President was well within his rights to do it, and obstruction of justice on that theory could not possibly have been committed by the President because of his role as the embodiment of the Article II power in the Constitution. And so Mueller should have said so, it seems to me, and he didn't, and instead had a press conference where he said that he was in essence not exonerating the President. Well, that's not the way the criminal law works. You either charge or you don't charge, but you don't say that you're not exonerating the defendant whom you haven't charged. That is an invitation, it seemed to me, and constitutionally speaking, an invitation to the Congress to impeach. And I thought that was a very serious error, and one that was quite uncharacteristic of my knowledge of Mueller's reputation. Really, that goes back to when he was an athlete in boarding school. He was always had an impeccable reputation, but he really
went to St. Paul's, I think.
Yeah, he really fumbled the delivery and the post delivery of the report, and in a way that was unfair to the President, it seems to me, and unprofessional.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of things to unpack, to use that term of phrase, but one has to have a certain paranoia about the way the world works, and in the hot recesses of Washington, D.C., there's a tremendous number of people that despise the President. I mean, some with good reason, some with bad and without good reason, but he certainly has many people that are against him. And the team that basically put the report together, as far as one can say, were pretty much people of the left, and maybe that's just who's out there, and they certainly, I don't mean to say they can't be neutral about this.
Well, I think they all had made contributions to Clinton campaign, or nearly all.
So there are people to the left, part of the culture that exists in Washington, where the subtle influences that exist play a role in opinions. And also, I think if you're a judge, you're in some more neutral arrangement or whatever. But if you're actually, I don't believe this. Mr. Mueller was out there in more of a not in a judicial kind of arrangement, so it could be that he could have been influenced by all of the just the general electrical situation in Washington. Also, I mean, just if the guy is human. So I agree with you that his reputation is quite superior and sterling. But in the middle of all this, he was being badgered by President Trump for many failings, and I mean he was being insulted. He was getting a lot of insults. So I just wonder. I mean, you'd like to imagine that a person would just be really a straight shooter in regards to that, and maybe that had an impact. But,
well, are you suggesting that the president's sort of intramural attacks against Mueller influenced Mueller in the way that he described his own report and its handling? You think the president shouldn't have said the things that he did?
Well, of course he shouldn't have said the things that he says, but of course the situation we're in now is sort of a difficult one, where the president is sort of saying pretty much whatever he wishes on any subject, and he's throwing whatever it is, clay against the wall. Some of it sticks, and it's true enough. There's a lot of the emperor has no clothes kind of thing. So traditionally, what at least in the provinces, what one would say would be, well, you're going to put a committee together to look this over, and who are the people there, and what are their backgrounds, and do we think we're going to get a disinterested opinion out of it? So I would say that at least it might be difficult to get a disinterested opinion if you have people in a certain culture exposed to certain opinions off the street. I mean, it would have some impact. And then people could also say, well, look at the decisions that are being made by the courts, the Supreme Court, whatever. The provincialism of the people in that culture that make these decisions are all pretty close to New York City. They had Ivy League education. They did this, they did that. They know the same people. They go to the same cocktail parties. So in the decision that was made, it could be that there was a certain, and there was also expectation on the left in any event that something was going to happen here. So tremendous expectations out there.
Absolutely.
And so some of the, and as you correctly say, the real story is that we tried to probe collusion, whatever it is, whatever. Well, there's no criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Absolutely nothing.
Right.
And then apparently if I can say it this way, maybe if the president is just throwing out whatever it is, there could be a subtle sense of intimidation that the Mueller team was experiencing with all the blowback, this and that, and would that rise to the level of suppression of justice, that your person you're investigating is sort of saying all these bad things about influencing your decision. So, well, I'll tell you, I'll just because this person is saying all these bad things about me in the newspaper, that's some suppression of justice there.
Well, I think the word is obstruction of justice, and I look at it a little bit from the president's point of view. I mean, he's the first sort of tweeting president, and he's obviously says what's on his mind, even when he probably could be a little more temperate. But on the other hand, I think there's a certain genius in the way he goes over the head of the fake news organs and gets straight to the to the American people. I think, as I say, I don't defend all of his remarks or anything else, but you have to look at, here's a president who was elected from day one. People said, a significant portion of the population, that it was that his election was illegal, it was criminal, it was highway robbery, it was unjust, it did not reflect the will of the American people, and so forth. And he, on the other hand, had all these campaign promises that he wanted to keep, and he, I must say, say what you will about him, he has gone to bat for every campaign promise he ever made, it seems to me. And he felt, correctly, I think, that he owed that to the people who voted for him. And to see his entire effort as president exist under a cloud of suspicion created by not an independent prosecutor, but a special counsel, given the circumstance that there was no crime in the first place, I can quite understand his frustration in trying to move his program along and make good on his promises, even though I suppose he could have been a little bit more dignified in expressing that frustration. But to claim that that was obstruction of justice doesn't wash it for the reasons that I said earlier.
Well, what is it that actually, I mean, I'm not familiar with whatever supports the idea there was obstruction of justice or raises a clue. The only thing I tried to say was maybe they were saying because the group was being attacked in the press, or at least President Trump was tweeting bad things about them or whatever, with the idea that maybe in saying those things they would back down. I mean, I guess that would. Was there anything more concrete than that?
Well, I think the most concrete thing was telling McGahn and I think maybe one or two other people that Mueller should be fired. But for the reasons I gave you earlier, I don't think that amounts to obstruction because it never happened, and he didn't follow through on it. And in any event, he had the right to fire Mueller in the first place. A further thing that must have bugged him was that Mueller was only appointed via Rosenstein after Comey was fired, and Comey himself, I think it's pretty clear, procured the appointment of Mueller so that his own reputation could be rescued after he was fired, and he should have been fired, in my view, Comey. Mm-hmm. So now we're going to have the investigators investigate the investigators, and maybe we'll get to the bottom of how Fusion GPS funded Christopher Steele, and Christopher Steele's evidence was put in front of a court in the United States, ex parte, of course, because the FISA court doesn't have adversary practice. And as a result, one political party ends up getting another one investigated by hiding contributions and lying about it.
Well, I think we could look forward to sort of a slow burn, quasi-impeachment, not really an impeachment, but just investigate, and then produce some unsavory details if they're extractable and put this on television.
Well, I don't think they're going to come up with anything really more meaningful than what the Mueller report had, and I think the polls, to use that dirty word, suggest that the American people are really quite tired of the whole thing. That doesn't mean, however, that they're tired, at least with a poll I saw last week, that they're tired of trying to find out how this started in the first place. I think 51% of those polled said that they do want to get to the bottom of how this Fusion GPS and Russia disinformation thing started.
Well, I'm sure many interesting details will emerge over the next year or so, Tom. And thank you for your observations tonight. It's been a pleasure having you with us once again here.
Well,
thanks a lot.
It's great to be down with you again, and maybe we'll sort it out another time soon.
Yes, we shall. Yes, we shall. Thank you.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.